that is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she builds planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Lee and Nile Albright Annual Symposium, an evening with Dr. Priscilla Chan, co-founder and co-CEO of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. I'm James Monroe. I'm the producer of adult programs and theater experiences here at the Museum of Science Boston, and it is my extreme honor to introduce and kick off this important evening. We look forward to our Albright Symposium every year. It is our opportunity to amplify and highlight important groundbreaking research and work happening around human health. And this year and tonight, we are so fortunate enough to have with us Dr. Priscilla Chan, who is here to talk all about the important work happening at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to help manage, cure, and treat all disease by the end of the century. And tonight, Dr. Chan is going to talk all about specifically their work happening around biomedicine, her personal connection to the Museum of Science Boston, as well as the overall mission of CZI to create an equitable, just, and healthy future for everyone. I need to thank our friends Lee and Nile Albright for their ongoing support of this symposium series, as well as all the adult programming happening here at the Museum of Science. It is because of them that we are here tonight and that Dr. Chan is with us for this important conversation and talk. So please join me in giving a huge virtual round of applause and thanks to Lee and Nile Albright and the entire Albright family. And finally, after the program tonight, I ask all of you to consider going to donate.mos.org/MOS at home and consider making a gift to allow us to keep bringing programming just like tonight to all of you. Once again, that's donate.mos.org/MOS at home. But now it is my extreme honor and privilege to turn it over to another very special guest tonight to introduce Dr. Chan. Please join me in welcoming to the stream the president of the Museum of Science Boston, Tim Ritchie. Take it away, Tim.
It is my great pleasure to introduce everyone to Dr. Priscilla Chan. Born and raised nearby in Quincy, Massachusetts, Dr. Chan attended local public schools, graduated from Harvard, and has gone on to great heights as a pediatrician, philanthropist, risk taker, and optimist. Most of you will know her as the co-founder of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, an organization launched in 2015 that aims to advance human potential and promote equality in areas such as health, education, scientific research, and energy. When CZI launched, what caught most of the world by storm was the commitment to make medical breakthroughs that would enable humanity to cure, prevent, or manage all diseases during their daughters' lifetimes. That is a bold commitment. That is the kind of vulnerable risk-taking we've learned to associate with Dr. Chan. Perhaps few of you knew of Dr. Chan's local roots, or that before going to medical school at the University of California at San Francisco, she taught fourth grade science. Dr. Chan's commitment to public service continued during medical school and in her pediatric residency, where she frequently provided care in San Francisco's public hospital. And it continues to this day, not only in the global work of CZI, but in the intensely local work she has undertaken as founder of the Primary School, an initiative that integrates health and education and serves children and families in East Palo Alto and the Bellhaven neighborhood in Menlo Park, California. Tonight, you will hear from Dr. Chan's life, about growing up in this community, about the priorities of CZI, about what drives her and her team. After Dr. Chan's initial remarks, I'll ask a few questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Priscilla Chan. Welcome back to this community, to the Museum of Science, and thank you for your ringing commitment to the well-being of everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I could only wish we could all be together at the museum in person. I grew up in Boston, and some of my fondest memories are from the days that I got to spend at the museum. So I'm hugely honored here to be here today to share a little bit about the organization that I now co-lead, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and our work to support researchers and accelerate science. But to start, in many ways, the Museum of Science started me down my own journey in science. It was a pretty improbable journey, one that my family couldn't have imagined when they fled Vietnam. At the onset of the war, Vietnam was a very dangerous place to be, especially if you were an entrepreneur, as my grandparents were. Later on, there'd be massacres of business people in Saigon. The only way for my parents to get out was by boat, for my grandparents to put their children on that boat and to set them off to sea and just hope for the best. So in the dead of the night, they stood on a dock and watched their own children float into the great unknown in search of a better future. And at that time, many Americans were opening up their homes to refugees. And so my family was one of the first Asian families in 𝘊𝘠𝘢. They came knowing little English, having little money, but big dreams for their children. My dad worked at a restaurant, my mom at an insurance company, until they eventually opened up their own restaurant together. We didn't have a lot, but I knew that I was one of the luckiest kids in the world. Even though our town wasn't rich, we had access to incredible public schools. My teachers believed in me, and whenever I wanted to visit one of the best science museums in the world, the T could get me there in half an hour. And that's exactly what I did throughout my childhood. Every year, our school would organize 2 big field trips, one to walk down the street to Hancock Cemetery and look at the various graves, and including visiting John Adams Memorial, and the other, my favorite, was to come here. I have so many vivid memories of those visits, of mornings spent playing in the giant Connects rooms and afternoons spent running up and down the musical stairwell. But there's one memory that stands apart from the rest. My classmates and I would sit outside that big staircase by the gift shop and eat our lunch and look up to that giant audiokinetic sculpture created by the artist George Rhodes. I bet everyone here has seen it, but in case you haven't, it is truly enormous, probably like 2 or 3 stories high. You could watch a ball begin its journey from the very top and follow it as it made its way down the whole machine. It would transform energy as it traveled, to make a windmill spin, to make a hammer rock back and forth, to make a bell ring. A single cycle took more than 10 minutes, and I could spend a whole hour watching it work. I've now spent a lot of time thinking about why that memory matters to me so much. I think it's this. When I was sitting in a classroom, science felt like a distant pen pal, a friend who lived far away. I read about it, wrote about it, but always at a distance. Scientist was over there, and I was over here. And we had a one-on-one relationship. But when I was at the museum, everything changed. Suddenly, science was this living, breathing thing that was sitting right in front of me. 3-dimensional, complex, dynamic, and most importantly, real. For the first time, it wasn't just me and science. It was me, science, in a room full of my friends. We could all see it, we could think about it, we could try to figure out how it worked, not on our own, but as a collective team. It was the ultimate play date, it was the ultimate science experiment. Looking back, I think that experience planted a seed of an idea that has been in my mind, that science, at its best, is a deeply collaborative enterprise. No one, not even the smartest kid in the room, can have a complete view of a problem. Our world is too beautiful and too complex for that. So if you want that complete view, and I absolutely do because I am a huge nerd, then you have to gather all the people you can, because together we ask more questions. We look at problems from new angles. We come up with smarter ideas, and ultimately we find better solutions. That was the lesson I carried with me every time I walked out of the museum. Some kids got astronaut ice cream. I got to see the world in a whole new way. See? Nerd priorities. The best part was putting what I learned into practice. Quincy had a magnet middle school for science, and there were plenty of opportunities for group work. There was one time when my chemistry teacher opened up his whole cabinet and let me and my friend mix random chemicals over recess. No holds bars, anything we wanted. Now that I'm a parent, I question the wisdom of that decision, but I'm still here. Things worked out. The love of science was sparked. Another time, my biology teacher had our entire class create a pond ecosystem in the back of our classroom. It smelled awful, but I loved the challenges of getting everything in balance and keeping everything alive. It took every single one of us to get it right. But things weren't always great. As I got older, I also learned what it meant and what it felt like to be isolated within a scientific community, to feel like you don't belong. The truth is, I got bullied in middle school, and I got bullied a lot. Part of it was because I did well in my classes, which were really competitive. But another part, the bigger part, was that I was obviously different than a lot of kids in Quincy. They never let me forget that I was an outsider. I spent a lot of 6th and 7th grade eating lunch alone or hiding out locked in a bathroom stall. Thank God I graduated. I did well in high school and I got into Harvard. I decided to study neurobiology and I threw myself headfirst into science. But even then, after my wildest dreams had come true, I was sure I had found my people. That feeling of being out of place, of being an imposter came roaring back. At Harvard, it felt like everyone knew some secret handshake that I had never learned. I imagined that the laboratory was gonna be my refuge, but sometimes it was even worse. I spent one of my summers in a really prestigious lab. I was dissecting mice, sometimes down to a single neuron. The postdoc in the lab noticed how good I was at this. So he told me, "You have great fine motor skills. Too bad you're a woman. Otherwise, you could be a great surgeon." I'm sure he thought he was being funny. But being who I was and having to live the life that I had, comments like that were devastating. There were times where I thought about leaving Harvard. I literally had the paperwork in my hands, but I toughed it out and I pressed on. I went to medical school at UCSF. I completed my residency in pediatrics, and it was working with these kids, talking to these families, that helped me see something that I couldn't before. The things that set me apart growing up were the same things that were going to make me a good doctor and a good scientist. If I hadn't spent those lunches locked in the bathroom, I would have never been as sensitive to the subtle signs that a kid wasn't doing well, either at home or at school. I can see that because I've lived that. I mentioned that my family didn't have much growing up. Well, many of my patients in my clinic didn't either. That meant I knew to look for signs of problems that a pediatrician might miss. They might not know, for example, that a lot of low-income housing in San Francisco has peeling lead paint because maybe they've never been inside an apartment like that. They might not be thinking about whether or not a child had recently crossed the border because their family never went through that kind of experience. In other words, you don't know what you don't know. And if you're a pediatrician, you might miss the hidden signals that a child is dealing with chemical exposure or trauma or abuse. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that every doctor needs to have personally experienced this to support their patients. I certainly haven't experienced all these things. But I did have enough context to ask the right questions and to listen carefully to the answers. And that helped me be there for all the kids and families that needed me. Here's the thing. I was lucky. I had the upbringing, the resources, the encouragement, the incredible good fortune to find my path into biomedicine. But think about everyone who doesn't. People who don't grow up in rich countries. People who don't live minutes away from great schools and great museums. People who find their way into science anyways, but who are told over and over again that they don't belong, people who start to believe that they don't belong, and people who, through the sheer force of will, push their way through, only to realize that they'll never have access to the tools and technologies that they need to do cutting-edge research. Some people talk about encouraging diversity in the sciences like it's an act of charity, but it's not. Every single person who's ever wanted to make it into this field and couldn't is someone who has had a unique perspective. They've had a life unlike anyone else's, a special lens that would have led them to get stuck on different problems, peer around different corners, catch on to something that maybe everyone else has overlooked. And we cannot afford to lose those perspectives, because it's precisely those perspectives that lead to breakthroughs. Every time we've made progress, it's because someone saw the problem differently, gave the rest of us a new way to look at the world. And we need those perspectives. Without them, we're putting a cap on the rate of scientific progress, and we're missing out on the breakthroughs that could transform our world. In 2015, when Mark and I started the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, this is what we were talking about. We knew that we had the resources and the time horizon to help tackle some of the hardest problems in biomedicine. And we believed that if we could broaden the group of people working on these problems and give them powerful new tools, we could accelerate the pace of science and make enormous progress. Enough progress, we hope, to be able to cure, prevent, and manage all disease within our daughter's lifetime. It was and remains an ambitious goal, but that's the point. We know that kind of progress is possible. The next step was identifying the areas where we can make real difference by funding new collaborations and building new scientific tools. Over time, we landed on 3: imaging, single-cell biology, and infectious disease. We've also rooted our work in a few core values. We support talented and motivated people. We build and share technology. We create opportunities for collaboration, and we share scientific knowledge. To put it another way, we want to get more and more people around that audiokinetic machine and give them new ways to see together and work together. Now, if I'm being honest, I didn't exactly know what would happen next after we brought all those people together. But I was optimistic that those collaborations would one day lead to breakthroughs in how we understand human biology and disease. 5 years out, that turned out to be a pretty good bet. And today I'd like to share a little bit about where 𝘕𝑖 is on this journey. Let me start with imaging. When you step back and look at the history of biomedical innovation, one of the things that you see is that progress moves in waves. Someone invents a new powerful technology. Scientists get their hands on it, and there's an explosion of research. And then eventually another invention sets off a whole new cycle again. In biology and medicine, those inventions include imaging technologies like microscopes, X-rays, ultrasounds, CT scans, and MRIs. These tools each open an entirely new window into the body, and they revolutionize our understanding of how it works. With that in mind, the 𝘕𝑖 science team has spent a lot of energy supporting the next generation of imaging technologies. No surprise, we believe that potential is enormous. We're talking about new tools to see inside individual cells deep within a living body, tools that allow us to watch what's happening in real time. I'm confident that these technologies will shift our understanding of basic human biology in revolutionary ways. We'll learn more about more than we've ever known about how cells function when they're healthy and when they're diseased. We'll be able to directly observe how they respond to change, like a new drug. The challenge is, of course, is that these machines are extraordinarily expensive, and they generate massive data sets. To analyze that much data, you need to run it through advanced machine learning models like TensorFlow or PyTorch. Most bench scientists don't have access to these tools, nor do they have the expertise to build their own machine learning models to analyze the data, nor is it efficient. So each of these barriers, cost, complexity, acts as a bottleneck It dramatically narrows who has access to cutting edge tools, who can use them, and what research gets done. With that insight, our own work at 𝘕𝘂𝑖 has come into focus. If we see those bottlenecks, we can work to help open them up. One way to do that is to make the latest machine learning tools for analyzing these kinds of data easier to use and more accessible. Enter 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖. It's a free open source tool built by a global community of imaging experts that we've been proud to support over the past few years. 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖 has been designed from day one to give cell biologists, neuroscientists, and other researchers a single tool to visualize and analyze these large, complex data sets that are being generated by next generation imaging technologies. Because 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖 is an open source tool built in Python, a growing community of experts in machine learning and image analysis are building these specialized 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖 plugins so that scientists can use these advanced analyses without needing to be programming experts themselves. Earlier this year, 𝘕𝘂𝑖 launched the 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖 Hub to gather these plugins in one spot. And we're actively helping grow an entire ecosystem of these plugins so that every scientist can find those tools that they need to help them discover more and faster. Not only does 𝘕𝘆𝘆𝑖 make it easier for the average scientist to visualize and explore these massive data sets, it puts a whole world of cutting edge tools at their fingertips. Meanwhile, we're also bringing more scientists together, not just imaging experts, but biologists, chemists, physicians, and computer scientists. These interdisciplinary teams are exploring the farthest frontiers of imaging, and they're moving all of us towards the future that I described to you earlier, where a doctor could watch what's happening in your individual cells in real time. That's really exciting. So in the coming years, we plan to continue to support these types of collaborations and inspire them even more. Of course, the biggest breakthroughs depend on pushing that kind of innovation outward. We want researchers everywhere to apply it to their problems in their own countries and communities. To do it, we've been cultivating networks of expertise around the world, from Europe, North America, Africa, Latin America, former Soviet countries, and more. We're also supporting imaging experts as they expand the capabilities of imaging core facilities and training networks, which will make cutting-edge tools available to scientists across an entire region. Imagine something like the Atacama Large Millimeter Array or the Great Magellan Telescope, but instead of outer space, researchers will be looking deep inside the human body. These efforts are still in their early days, but it's hard not to be excited about where they might lead. I feel the same way about our work in single-cell biology. Now, I know there are some single-cell experts here today. I know that several of our partners, from the Broad Institute to Boston Children's Hospital to Mass General and so many others, are hopefully listening in. Without their work and the work that's happening across Boston, much of this recent progress that I'm about to talk about would not exist. For those who are newer to this field, single-cell biology is a scientific discipline that seeks to understand how biological processes work at the most fundamental level. It represents a toolkit of technologies that's powering an exciting new wave of science, one that studies individual cells to see which ones are responsible for what and what challenges come up when something goes wrong. It's allowing us to see processes at a resolution that we previously thought impossible. And along the way, it's transforming the way we think about complex biological processes. It's being used in a growing number of ways, but my favorite, or one of my favorites, is an application through the Human Cell Atlas. You can think about the Human Cell Atlas like a map, a reference for every single cell type, where they're located and what makes them unique, until we map out all 37 trillion cells in the human body. It's never been done before. And if the project is successful, it will change how we fundamentally understand human biology. It could tell us how cell types arise, how they become specialized, and how disease manifests in the human body. Perhaps most importantly, it could change the way we treat those diseases. And it could finally help us address those global disparities that have plagued us for so long. But to do that, The single cell community and its research needs to reflect the full diversity of the world. Like imaging technology, the tools of single cell biology should be accessible to everyone. And the data that drives those conclusions should represent all people. After all, a reference map for all human cells isn't much good if it only looks at the fraction of the population. With those goals in mind, I want to tell you about two single cell projects that I'm especially excited about. The first is called 𝘊𝘁. It's an open source single cell data analysis and visualization tool. We built it to help single cell biologists make sense and share their data sets, which can be terabytes in size and extraordinarily complex. Getting a handle on that data often means shipping it off to a computational biologist, and then you wait days and days before you can do anything about it. That kind of analysis is expensive, time-consuming, and cumbersome. If you worked at a big lab or a big company, you might be able to pull it off, but you'd need to be able to invest a year of time and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which isn't something most scientists can do. 𝘊𝘁 changes that equation. By letting researchers visualize, explore, and annotate data sets in an interactive way, it cuts down the time for analysis from hours to seconds. And not just researchers. 𝘊𝘁 doesn't require any lines of code, which means anybody who wants to explore the data has the tools to do so. All you need is a browser and some curiosity. It's a game changer. Now every user can build off of each other's insights, reuse data, answering new questions. And we're not just building tools. Through a funding opportunity we've recently announced, we're supporting computational experts to help advance these tools and resources, encourage data integration and reuse, and help researchers gain greater insights into health and disease. Already, we're seeing more scientists get involved and more questions asked, including, crucially, about problems that have been historically understudied. Problems like lupus, which disproportionately impacts Black, Asian, and Latinx populations that haven't been deeply studied. And it's easy to see why this problem has persisted for so long, because even now, 80% of our genomics data still comes from people of European ancestry. Last year, we launched a pilot program to support 10 teams that are working to change that by bringing in greater donor representation to the Human Cell Atlas. Already, our grantees are exploring the origins of the disproportionate impact of breast cancer on African American women. They're building out the African and Asian immune cell atlases, and together, they're filling in huge gaps in our knowledge about basic human and cellular biology. And we're expanding this work to support even more researchers, 16 teams from 31 countries, to contribute diverse tissue samples to the Human Cell Atlas. In addition to building out cell atlases for adults, we're extremely eager to support efforts to develop a pediatric cell atlas as well. For me, this work hits deep because the people whose cell we know least about, they're children. They're my old patients at UCSF. All the time, I would sit down with patients of children who had undiagnosed conditions. UCSF is a national referral center for rare pediatric diseases, and we're supposed to have the answers. Only too often, we didn't. The genomic data didn't exist, the research hadn't been done, which meant I had to look those parents in the eye and say, I'm so sorry, but we don't know what's wrong. Pediatric single-cell biology could get us to a world where those conversations don't have to happen as often or anymore. We can use these technologies to map out every kind of cell in a kid's body. We could learn about things that could help us unravel the mysteries of countless pediatric diseases. And it could be life-changing for adults too, because a lot of us are living with conditions that we've developed as children. Now I want to close by talking about another topic that's been near and dear to my heart, and I imagine all of yours these days too. And that topic is infectious disease. As the past year and a half has shown us, a virus in one part of the world can turn into an outbreak in another. Our theory of the case is, essentially, infectious diseases know no borders, so scientific collaboration can't afford to either. Right now, that collaboration is being stifled in both directions. On one side, local leaders on the ground, especially in low and middle income countries, don't have the tools that they need to identify and track viruses in their community. On the other side, scientists and policymakers around the world are missing that same data that could be used to analyze and inform public health decisions. It was that first need, to empower low-resource scientists to track diseases in their community, that led Chan Zuckerberg BioHub co-president 𝘧𝘪𝘀𝘀 and a team of engineers at 𝘕𝘂𝘃 to create a software platform called 𝘕ike. It's a free open source software tool that lets scientists quickly upload process samples, snot, throat swabs, blood draws, take your pick, onto the cloud where they can pinpoint unidentified pathogens lurking inside. From the start, 𝘕ike was designed with one big bet in mind. We believe that if we gave low-resource scientists the tools and the training to identify and share information about viruses in their communities, and we didn't mandate how these tools would be used, then good things would happen. Within a year of the tool's release, that bet paid off. Here's one story. There was a microbiologist in Bangladesh, Dr. Sanjiti Saha. She was trying to find the cause of a meningitis outbreak amongst the children in Dhaka. But none of the tests she was running could identify that pathogen that was responsible until she met Joe. After running her samples through 𝘕ike, Dr. Saha saw the telltale signs of chikungunya, a mosquito-borne virus that she had never expected to find. She was then able to use that knowledge to treat her patient and develop a vaccination strategy. That's exactly the type of outcome we're hoping for with 𝘕ike. We knew that by empowering scientists like Dr. Saha, that they would be better equipped to stop outbreaks on the ground, and the wider scientific community would be better equipped to provide support. But what we didn't know was that tool would become so relevant so quickly. In early 2020, we started hearing rumblings about a novel coronavirus that was taking off in Wuhan. Right away, Joe and his team reached out to their partners around the world. Some were already using 𝘕ike to validate and track the virus, but everyone needed a way to get easy, fast results. Our team quickly worked to get a COVID-19 module. Dr. Saha, for example, discovered a strain with 2 unknown mutations, and since then she's been tracking the Delta variant in collaboration with the Bangladesh Ministry of Health. Those types of partnerships between scientists on the ground, public health officials, and policymakers became the inspiration for another tool we've built at 𝘕𝘂𝘃 called Aspen. Aspen is a free open source software tool to collect and interpret data about local outbreaks. Part of the goal is to help equip local public health departments with accurate data, since they usually have comparatively fewer resources at their disposal than their state and federal counterparts. And we want to make sure that they have the information that they need to make policy decisions for their communities. Early applications of this have been amazing. In Humboldt County, California, we saw local leaders track where COVID was entering their community and find the farm that was the original source of the outbreak. Another county, Santa Clara, used our tools to discover that their staff had played a key role in large nursing home outbreaks within and between facilities. With that knowledge, facilities could implement new policies to keep their residents safe. When we set out to build these tools, we didn't expect local researchers in Wuhan to collaborate with scientists in North Carolina. And we didn't expect one of our partners in Cambodia to use 𝘕ike to confirm their country's first case of COVID. But we weren't surprised either, because we know that when you give scientists the tools to address the priorities in their community, that's when the magic happens. It's that same magic I see. Excuse me. It's that same magic I see when I'm surrounded by the brilliant scientists, physicians, and technologists who we partner with at 𝘕𝘂𝘃. And really, it's that same magic that I felt many years ago, sitting with all my friends around that big machine. The problems that we're tracking now might be a little bit harder, but the work that we're doing together proves that they can be solved. I learned the lesson in these halls, virtually, in the Boston Museum of Science, where I learned that research doesn't have to be a solitary endeavor, and that my experiences have taught me that it can't be. Not if we want to address the most urgent challenges in biomedicine, and not if we're going to cure and prevent or manage all disease by the end of the century. So let me close by saying a huge, now long overdue thank you to the entire staff in the museum. Thank you for inspiring me from when I was tiny until today. And thank you for having me here today.
Dr. Priscilla Chan, it is such a pleasure to welcome you back to the Museum of Science. We exist to make a difference in lives like yours and in so many others. One of the things that I think that I'd like to ask you about, oh, by the way, we were able to restore the link, so we are talking to a live audience now. But one of the things that I would like to focus on in the time we have together is this strain of optimism and empathy that runs through your entire presentation, your entire talk. And with respect to optimism, it seems to presuppose something that science believes, and that is we live in a knowable universe, is that the answers really are out there. The answers are out there to the problems we face. What is the role of that belief, that we live in this discoverable universe? What is the role of that optimism in your life and in the role and in the work of 𝘂𝘂i?
I think the way we think about it is there's so much to know and discover, but it's hard to dictate the exact pathway through which we get there. And part of science is to be surprised and delighted and to pursue it because of the deep sense of wonder, but to be inspired and moved by being able to contribute to a greater understanding of ourselves and of all of humanity, really. And so I think it's both a combination of big dreams and being able to put in the hard work day by day that it takes to do great science.
And then what about the role of empathy? Your own experience as a young person gave you great empathy for people in poverty, for immigrants, for other nations, and for people with talent who just need opportunity. So what is the role of empathy in the kind of computational, tech-driven initiatives supported by 𝘂𝘂i?
I actually think it is incredibly important that we are building tools with empathy for a diverse group of scientists, physicians, people who are going to drive discovery, because that intuition actually helps us look at even a data set slightly differently, helps us turn things over and maybe look at it upside down in a way that we had never thought of before. But in order to do that, we have to, the scientific community, the computational biologists, have to be able to be willing for things to be tinkered with, for tools to be able to work in a way that's unexpected and to allow that flexibility, which is partially why we find the open source ethos so important for a lot of these tools. We have to be able to allow that creative plug-in. We have to allow folks to be able to examine the way the tool is built to validate for themselves how it works. It's that trust, transparency, and creativity that needs to be built into the way we build software to allow for surprises to happen when we use these tools.
It sounds like you're willing to think about medicine differently too, putting tools in people's hands all over the world. And so I'm kind of interested in whether that faith has been borne out, which it sounds like it has, and then who are some of your more unlikely collaborators? Who are some of these unsung heroes that come to mind that the world may never hear about, but that you've had the privilege to work with through the 𝘂𝘂i initiative?
You know, for when you think about who's driving science, I've been talking about people building technology. I've been talking about scientists. And I only obliquely alluded to the amazing patient population. And from my experience as a physician, patients, their families, they are some of the most powerful, most motivated people in this network. And oftentimes, and historically, they've been on the outside. Yeah. Folks might ask for them to participate in a study or give a sample without really asking them to engage in the process. But turns out, first of all, these people are incredibly inspiring. It is very hard to say no to a committed mother. Let's be very clear. And they both can mobilize people to change the way, recruit people to participate in research. They bring up fascinating insights about an illness that you may not have known. And they actually change the way physicians and scientists ask their questions and are able to really pinpoint what matters. I'm not surprised knowing what I know from being trained as a physician, but it's been incredibly rewarding and powerful to see patient groups really be able to accelerate science in a sort of new leg of the stool as part of the scientific ecosystem.
I'm surprised by the answer and pleased by it. I hadn't thought of it that way because it is true. Every patient is different. And by a focus on a single cell, you give a chance for us to respect patients and to treat them as that N of one, as they say, that one person, to look at them with great respect. That takes me maybe back to that time when you felt that imposter syndrome at Harvard. And I wonder if you could take yourself back to that part where you were feeling like you didn't belong and you were feeling like you were excluded. And when you talk about the importance of a single patient contributing, how important is it for people to understand that science shouldn't be just left to the professionals? How important is it for everyday folk to feel a sense of agency with science, to feel like they can use science and technology in our world?
There's a lot in that question. One, I think the parallel between single cell and imposter syndrome is fascinating. One, because you think, with imposter syndrome, you think you're the only one, but then turns out if there's a generalized problem or if there's a trend that's not productive or healthy, or you're doing just fine. And in single cell, I want to make clear that even though you work with an N of one or you're working with a rare disease, oftentimes rare diseases or that N of one can highlight a specific way that a biological process is broken and then give you insights that can generalize to a larger population. So, a very specific mutation in the development of the immune system can actually tell you how the immune system works for everyone, including healthy people. And that's super powerful. And then when we get to the question of, the second half of your question, I'm trying to remember.
Well, I think the idea is that so you're respecting the single patient and their participation in the process. And then that we can extend that to science about the importance of science agency, feeling like you have agency. Right. Just as a normal person, because science has become so professional, you don't feel like you can contribute to it. But I imagine in your view, people having agency and a sense of agency with science and technology is very important.
I think what's important is this sense of wonder and progress that we're all able to be a part of. And I think the museum sort of opens, I talked about how the museum opens that door for so many young people. Like, you can discover things. You just did discover something in this exhibit. And I think seeing how that progress is happening today. When we had our with SARS-1 in about 10 or 15 years ago now, it took a long time for us to even understand the genetic sequence of the virus. With coronavirus, we were able to sequence it within a month, and to be able to really have treat both medications and vaccines within a year and a half, that is a breakneck pace that no one would have been able to have even imagined before. And now we get to have that sense of wonder of like, if we can do this together as a collective society, what else can we do to keep our community safe and healthy? The pandemic has obviously been devastating, but there are silver linings about how we can work together better and faster.
I think that leads to an important question and observation sort of about collective action, just what you just said, how academia, industry, government, and the public can rise up together to take on the problems we're facing. What are your hopes for these sectors working together? We saw it happen with COVID-19, but there are so many other things that have to happen down the road. What are some of your hopes for the collective impact of these four sectors coming together to rise up to face the problems we're facing?
You know, when you think about biomedicine, it is a huge ecosystem in which billions and billions and billions of dollars get spent every year. But I have to say that each one of these parts of the ecosystem have amazing superpowers. The discovery and creativity in academia is, especially in our country, I'm proud to say, is unparalleled. Our ability to translate things into medicines to safely treat people are top notch. But we lose a lot when we don't actually both acknowledge the strengths and how we can better work together and collaborate. And so, like, you know, how do we actually acknowledge that we all play a critical role, try to eliminate some of those inefficiencies based on trust, based on communication, and then be able to bridge those more efficiently to be able to drive progress together?
And part of that progress through CZI, which impresses me so much, is your willingness to transcend geopolitical boundaries, your willingness to go wherever the good science is being done and empower people everywhere. And I think that that is kind of contrary to the spirit of the age right now. So what are some of your hopes for the cross-country cooperation that we have seen happen and that you have made happen at CZI?
Well, we try, because to be clear, to be able to actually advance biomedicine, to be able to cure, manage, and prevent all disease, that for us is our North Star, our top priority, and everything else is just something that we have to address or manage to make our way to that goal together.
Yeah, it's a very, very ambitious goal, and you're still entering the season in your life where I could imagine what you might say to your 13-year-old self. I can easily imagine that as you've told your stories about being bullied and about feeling like an imposter and still being driven to make a difference in the world. Here's my question, though. What do you think your 80-year-old self would be saying to you right now, where you are, doing what you're doing? What does the 80-year-old Priscilla Chan say to Priscilla Chan?
Oh boy. I hope she says your joints are working out just fine and you're still surfing. So that would be good. Number one. And two, I would say, you weren't always right, but you made a big difference because you kept at it.
And what would she say about this part of your journey from brave thinking to brave acting? Because in 2015, this was a brave thought. And now you're just taking all these risks, you're jumping in. And what would she say about all this brave acting that you're doing now? What guidance would she give you?
I hope that the brave acting, which for me is being vulnerable, being able to take risks and say, I know this sounds wild, but we're going to go try it. That bravery, that vulnerability, turns out to be a superpower because it invites others to join in to be brave as well.
Thank you, Dr. Priscilla Chan. I think that those are the words we should leave for tonight. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I know we're going to send a link out to everyone. And we do wish you and 𝘂𝑐𝑖 well in the brave things you're trying to do. And I hope that all of us will believe that what humanity has is the power to solve problems. That is what we were built to do, to find innovative problems to the solutions to the problems we face. I want to thank once again the Albrights for making this possible, for Dr. Priscilla Chan for this evening, and I hope you and everyone have a good night tonight. Thank you so much.